Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Santa Lucia Natural Processed Honduras from Manhattan Coffee Roasters. And there's the bag right there. And Manhattan, based out of Rotterdam, Netherlands, and they're the coffee roaster we featured the most in 2021, and that's for pretty good reason, as I'd consider them to be one of the most progressive and innovative coffee roasters in the entire world. And this coffee right here is no exception, as there are a couple of notes I wanted to get out of the way before we start discussing the coffee itself. So first things first, if you don't know, this is actually a Lorena variety, and if you're not familiar with that variety, then it does have one really distinct factor, and that's that it has about a third the caffeine of a normal cup of coffee. But I've had this variety, I want to say a couple times before, but there's only one instance I can really remember quite well, and that was a couple of years ago when I did purchase Onyx's Rare Varieties set, and it did include a Lorena. And I made a note of that coffee because I did quite enjoy that one. So the variety itself is a more rare variety out there. But even more so interesting about this coffee is Manhattan had a limited quantity of this coffee. So they only sold this on their web shop. You were only able to purchase it directly from Manhattan, and I was fortunate enough to get my hands on this coffee. And as a result, I'm looking very much forward to discussing this one. This right here is day 19 of this coffee. That's probably the quickest I've ever finished a bag of Manhattan coffee, and I had to kind of speed run this one, but let's go ahead and start discussing the details. Recipe, of course, we have is a 16:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 208 degrees Fahrenheit. Like this one better through the V60. Now, Manhattan is on the lighter side of European coffee roasters, but there was one thing I wanted to discuss about this coffee. If you've brewed a lot of Manhattan's coffees, then you know when you ground the beans, they have this really pretty color to them. It's kind of like this amber color. It's this really, really light kind of yellowish color. But this coffee didn't have that, and it probably has to do with the processing method as well as the variety that we have here. So I just wanted to note that real quick. But with that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee itself. Day 7, first impression, and coffee was pretty much in line with the expectations. So obviously I had some pretty high expectations going into this one, but it was pretty sweet right from the start. There was a very slight bit of nuttiness, which isn't surprising. It's a Central American cup of coffee. And then there was a pretty interesting buttery sweetness. They have a nougat flavor note listed on here, and could be the priming effect, but I definitely felt this unique nougat note that I haven't necessarily felt in many, if any, other coffees. So that was quite nice. But as you would imagine, the most defining characteristic of this coffee was this apple sweetness, and I would describe it most closely with something like an apple jelly, sort of apple preserves, and it was a really positive first impression. Day 9, continuing with the very notable apple components, and I would say that this is somewhat reminiscent of even a Jello or a kind of jelly-like apple. It's definitely a more sugary sort of apple, and not necessarily like a fresh cut fruit sort of apple, but a little bit more of that sugary kind. Cup is relatively clean for it being a natural, not really surprising. Manhattan does a great job with their natural coffees, and can definitely see plenty of cookie-like sweetness in the cup. They have a biscotti flavor note listed on here, and I've had a lot of coffees this year that have this sort of cookie sugary sweetness. This one had it. It was very nice, very solid day on day 9 as well. Day 11 ran into the V60 and was getting a pretty similar cup with a little bit of added body and a little bit more structure to the flavor profile as a whole. So that's why I was really liking through the V60, and later we would settle on just sticking with the V60. Could describe this again as, well, an apple Danish, because it had that really kind of fun butteriness to it and that apple taste that's a little bit more jelly-like. So apple Danish was what I settled on. Again, some pretty sugary and wonderful cookie-like sweetness and terrific body in the V60. Really enjoyable cup on this day. Day 13, back to the Chemex, and this is the benefit of the Chemex, because there were some benefits of the Chemex. It really highlights the apple brightness in the cup of coffee, so you really are seeing that kind of apple acidity, seeing when done through the V60, a lot more lively this way. Plenty of similarities to the Techno Peach from Luna, which we reviewed earlier this year, which was, I think, described as a, they have it as a peach pie, but it definitely had this kind of buttery pastriness to it as well, so both of them had it. This one just had a lot more vibrancy to the cup. Day 15, seeing overall improvements in the cup. The improvements were there, but they were incremental, so you weren't seeing drastic changes or drastic improvements in this cup of coffee, but it was getting better each time we brewed it. Back through the V60, again sharing a lot of components with the Chemex, but with a lot more of that added body. As the coffee cools down, it really ramps up the apple sweetness, which is one of the better parts of this cup of coffee. Not the biggest fan of apple, but when you make it really sweet, I will enjoy it. Day 17, coffee has remained pretty consistent still. The apple acidity is delightful, and I would most liken it to something like apple preserves. Mentioned that earlier, but still feel that way later in this cup of coffee. Lots of brightness in the cup, great sugariness, pretty nice cup overall. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we were getting. And 4 level 4s, so let's go through them real quick. So cleanliness, and we touched on that really briefly, but want to highlight and emphasize that again. I think Manhattan does a wonderful job with their naturals of keeping them pretty clean, so I think that that's definitely justified at level 4. Finish, it's definitely not an overbearing, overlasting finish. I think the finish here is about as nice and in line with what you would expect, so great job on the finish. Sweetness, level 4. It might be on the slightly higher side of that level 4, but I think level 4 is perfect for where I want to rate the sweetness, definitely right there. And then the citrus fruit, we always lump the apple into the citrus fruit category because it just fits there the best, and this is again a little bit more citric of an apple. So I think level 4 is definitely justified there. And then we have a couple of level 3s, acidity. I've always said that as long as you balance it out with some really strong cleanliness and some really strong sweetness, then I don't mind if you ramp up the acidity even to a level 4. And you could possibly even push it up that high, but I think I really like it at level 3. So the great balance of those factors really makes this a pretty nice cup of coffee. And the florals at a level 3, I think it just kind of has this, I don't know, anytime I get this pastry, it just does remind me of a slight bit of floral. So it might be a little exaggerated at the level 3, could even do a level 2, but I kind of feel it. So I'm pushing it to a level 3 for me. Body, level 3, so yeah, this tasting wheel was obviously made when done through the V60. Let's see here, anything else worth noting? The bitterness is something I actually wanted to address because I knew I made it at a 2 on this tasting wheel, and Lorinas are pretty famous for not having any sort of bitterness to it, but I'm not calling this coffee bitterness again. I can't remember exactly where I pulled out the bitterness from, but I feel like maybe it's a very slight chocolate bitterness, as the chocolate is at a level 2, but caramel level 2, that's what I'm thinking of the florals. The florals, it was got a slight bit of a honey floral. There we go. Yeah, as I'm looking at this tasting wheel, it's reminded me of all the factors in this cup of coffee. It's a little bit more complex of a cup of coffee than I think a lot of people might expect. But yeah, when I'm kind of talking myself through it, I can see all these components in this tasting wheel. It makes a lot of sense. I think it looks pretty good. All right, overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. I really, really like this cup of coffee. This is actually what I was looking for this time of year. It's kind of as fall of a cup of coffee as you can get. They have the apple pie flavor note listed on here, and that's kind of what I was looking for, and it very much sung in this cup of coffee. This epitomizes what I really like about Manhattan is for a cup of coffee that's part of their normal catalog, it's really impressive. And that's been the theme since the first time I tried Manhattan is even their average, normal, everyday cups of coffee are really nice and standout cups of coffee. This one was really enjoyable. Not going to finish on my top 10 coffees of the year as you'd imagine, but it was one of those coffees that I would say there's a very specific person that enjoys these cup of coffees, and you know, I think anybody can enjoy this cup of coffee as much as I did because it's just got such wonderful components, such wonderful balance in it. Overall, I mean, I'm kind of gushing about this cup of coffee. But leading into that, the type of person I would suggest this coffee to is, that Lorena fit is kind of fun. So somebody that does like something with a little less caffeine in it, because not only does this not sacrifice any flavor for having less caffeine, but if anything, it has tremendous and wonderful, unique out there flavor. This coffee stands alone on its own for being unique in its own sense. This was a really sweet, fun cup of coffee. Had a very distinct profile that I haven't necessarily had too often, so there was everything about this cup of coffee that I enjoyed. I can't knock it for anything. I don't think that there was anything I didn't enjoy about this cup of coffee. So pretty well-rounded, pretty enjoyable experience, but I think I've gushed about this coffee enough. I'll leave it at that. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, we'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like and subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Santa Lucia Natural Processed Honduras from Manhattan Coffee Roasters. Thank you for watching.